кейбір қазақ сөзді ұмытып қалдым.
Гарвард университетінің Peabody деген музейінің архивтанушысы, мұрағаттанушысы.
Мен түсінемін, бірақ сөйлей алмаймын.
So in Mongolia they kept the culture, but in Kazakhstan we didn't.
How do I be Kazakh?
Because the Kazakhstan in their mind and Kazakhstan in reality are two different countries. So, yeah.
The Jersu isn't the same.
Did you see any Kazakh-speaking parents at Haileybury?
Because of colonization, genocide, we lost so much of our language and culture.
I felt like I was talking to my uncle from my owl, right?
People would say, well, it's not Kazakh, and I would say, but it is Kazakh.
It's not your fault. It's the status quo in Kazakhstan.
I don't want somebody who is actually a white person to act like they're Cherokee.
And they start with "Саламатсыздар ма, қуаныштымын," and they say, why Russian ambassador never does that?
Like hospitality became very important to me. It's not a big thing in the U.S., but I would sit there, saying, I have to put out nuts and almonds and apricots, and people in the U.S. would laugh at me and be like, why are you doing this? Like, you don't have to put out a dastarkhan. And I was like, but I do.
Бүгін бізде күшті қонақ, сіздерге де қатты ұнайды деген үміттемін. Таныс болыңыздар, қарсы алыңыздар. Селия Эммельхайнз. Дұрыс па, мен сіздің атыңызды дұрыс айттым ғой?
Дұрыс.
Иә. Гарвард университетінен, қазақша орысша айтатын болсақ, Гарвард университетінің Peabody деген музейінің архивтанушысы, мұрағаттанушысы, көп жылдар бойы Қазақстанда тұрған, Қазақстанда жұмыс істеген, қазақша күшті біледі.
Жоқ.
Акцент жоқ мүлдем. Және қысқаша Селияны таныстырып кететін болсам, Гарвард университетіне дейін Вашингтондағы өте әйгілі Смитсониан институтында жұмыс істеген, тарих музейінде, бұл Америкадағы ең мықты музейлердің бірі. Және Беркли университетінде зерттеу кітапханасында жұмыс істеген. Оның алдында Қазақстанда Назарбаев университеті Haileybury мектебінде жұмыс істеді. Оған дейін Моңғолияда антропологиялық еңбектер жасап, антропологиялық зерттеу жасап, жай Моңғолия емес, Моңғолиядағы Баян-өлгейде болдыңыз ба, қазақтардың мәдениетін зерттеген антрополог, яғни дәл біздің подкасттың керемет классикалық қонағысыз. Өйткені біз подкастқа сондай Америка мен Қазақстанның арасында қатысы бар адамдар шақырамыз. Қазақтар осында жүрген және сіз сияқты америкалықтар. Қош келдіңіз.
Рахмет, қуаныштымын.
Мен де өте қуаныштымын. Қарап отырсам, сіз менің айтып отырған бәрін түсініп отырсыз ба, әлде ағылшыншаға өтейін ба?
Мен түсінемін, бірақ сөйлей алмаймын. Ағылшынша да мүмкін
оңайырақ жерлерін қазақша сөйлесек, ал қиын жерлерін
біз араластыра аламыз.
Жақсы.
Как болса.
Сіз қазақ тілін сонша қанша жылда үйреніп алдыңыз, мынадай деңгейге жету үшін?
Біріншіден мен 2008 жылдан оқыдым.
Бірақ соңғы 5 жылда практика болған жоқ деп отырсыз ғой?
Өкінішке орай.
Бірақ өте қатты жақсы сақталып қалған. Қазақша кітаптар оқисыз ба, әлде видео көресіз ба?
Сирек, мүмкін подкаст. Сіздің подкаст тыңдаймын кейде.
Қазақша подкаст тыңдайсыз?
Бірақ өткен жылда мен көп французша оқыдым, сол себептен кейбір қазақ сөзді ұмытып қалдым.
Неше тіл білесіз сонда сіз?
Ағылшынша, орысша, аздап қазақша, ең жақсы, және французша.
Қазақша, орысшадан да жақсы білесіз ба?
Иә.
Мәссаған. Біле білсеңіздер, біздің подкастқа қонақ болып келген Фатима Молдашева, осы Селияның алғашқы ұстаздарының бірі. Фатимаға рахмет. Селия келе жатыр деп, біз сосын хабарласып, бірден осында шақырып алдық. Селия, білесіз ба? Екеуміздің өмір жолымызда ұқсастықтар бар екен. Өйткені сіз Астанада тұрғанда, жұмыс істегенде мен де Астанада болдым. Меніңше Назарбаев университетінің кітапханасында екеуміздің ортақ танысымыз бар, Әсемгүл. Әсемгүл танисыз ба?
Иә.
Әсемгүлді мен жақсы білемін. Динара деген менің құрбым сол жерде істеді. Сосын сіз Берклида кітапханада жұмыс істегенде, мен Берклида 2 жыл магистратурада оқыдым. Дәл сол жылдары. Бірақ бір-бірімізбен кездескен жоқпыз. Ең қызығы, мен андеград бакалавриатты Астана Евразиялық университетінде археология және этнология мамандығы бойынша бітірген.
Қандай күшті.
Сіз енді археология, этнология, қазір Peabody музейі, Гарвардтағы археология, этнология музейі ғой. Яғни қызық, сондықтан бүгінгі әңгіме екеумізге де қызық болады деген ойдам.
Мүмкін ағылшынша.
Жақсы, жарайды. Селия, when did you realize that your research area or just your work interest would be related to Kazakhstan or Central Asia? When that started?
Honestly, when I was 16 years old, I went to Kazakhstan. Yes.
Wow.
And my parents knew some nonprofit workers who were working there as doctors and development workers. So they sent me to be like an au pair to help with all of their children. And I started learning Russian then. And when I came back, I wanted to go to university and learn Russian. So I started with Russian studies. But then when I was looking at master's programs in anthropology, I talked to a professor and he said, well, what country do you want to go to? And I said, well, Kazakhstan, obviously. So he put me in contact with Cynthia Werner, who is an anthropologist who studies Kazakhstan. She's at Texas A&M University. And I had the good fortune that I could go with her to Mongolia on one of her research projects.
And she already was researching Kazakhs in Mongolia, or just Mongolia?
She had a project, so she started researching Kazakhs in Shymkent for her doctoral dissertation. And then she met a woman named Holly Barkas, who did a lot of work with Mongolia and Kazakhs as well. And together they got a National Science Foundation grant. And I was a grad student, and that I was able to come and join her. So it was amazing.
Before starting talking about Mongolia, what city were you working like an au pair in Kazakhstan?
Just outside of Almaty.
Okay, so you're familiar. And how long was that trip?
That was one summer.
But you were a school student then?
I was homeschooled. So my parents said, here's a piece of paper, you're graduated. It's a very American system. You can educate at home.
But you are very well educated, so all the kudos to your parents, right?
Yeah.
They must be amazing.
Good.
Are they like in academia?
No, my father worked with computers, my mother stayed at home.
Wow. Yeah. I thought they're professors somewhere because...
No, just ordinary, intelligent people, yeah.
And you grew up in Ohio, right?
Ohio.
Yeah, because I looked up in your LinkedIn account, and I noticed that there was some Catholic school or something, right? They were very Catholic religious people. They are.
My parents are not, but I went to Ohio Dominican University, which is traditionally Catholic. It was pretty secular by the time I got there, but there were little nuns who would teach us sometimes, so they had some culture.
Fascinating. That's fascinating. Yeah, great. Just tell me about your time in Mongolia. What did you learn?
So I came in on the second year. This was a multi-year project, and you could find out about it online. And we were interviewing like herders. Some of them were oromandar or kandastar, and they had come after the Soviet Union ended. They had come to Kazakhstan on these programs to bring back oromandar. And some of them had said, this is difficult, I'm not fitting in Kazakhstan, and they actually went back. So we were looking at this migration, but also this kind of circulation of people who said, where do I live now? How do I be Kazakh? Is it Kazakhstan? Is it this very, very Kazakh area of Mongolia? Yes. And I think Bayanolgi is 95% Kazakh. I realized I was there for 8 weeks or 10 weeks. The last week I was there, I went into a bank and I had to say Sainbainu, hello. And I realized I had learned zero Mongolian because I could be in Mongolia and only speak Kazakh. Which was amazing. So
I also noticed somewhere that you're studying like a gender or policies among Mongolian Kazakhs. Is there an issue over there at all?
So this was part of the project, and so Cynthia again had done her dissertation research in the Shymkent area in the 1990s. So she was looking at gender, and she was looking at shuttle trading. So people who would trade goods back and forth, right?
Yes, everyone's moms, like my mom and my mother-in-law, everyone in the 90s were doing this shuttle trading.
So she was saying this is a big cultural thing, it's an economic change. And she's in the field of economic anthropology, so it's saying on the everyday life, whether you're in Silicon Valley.
Right? Chilnochniki,
yeah. And so she had this project, so she carried those interests over to her project in Mongolia, and she was saying, how do people live economically after the end of socialism? Of course, it's very hard. And then gender norms, are they the same? Are they changing? And then we were looking at citizenship too. So part of my question was, what happens if you're not a citizen in either country? Some people gave up Mongolian citizenship. They didn't get it in Kazakhstan. And you know, in the modern world, not to be a citizen, it's very hard.
I've read your article about it. So it's called Privileged Exclusion in Post-Soviet Kazakhstan.
Yes.
Very interesting. I read it with great interest. And can you please explore this topic more? Because if I understood correctly, your main thought was that Kazakhstan was inviting some Kazakhs from other regions like China, Mongolia, Russia, Turkey, everywhere. They would come to Kazakhstan like with this thought in their mind that it's my homeland, home of my ancestors, everything will be great. They come, they don't develop sense of belonging to Kazakhstan somehow, because the Kazakhstan in their mind and Kazakhstan in reality are two different countries. And some of them wanted to go back. Some of them like they were struggling in Kazakhstan. I know that's true. So yeah, just from scientific perspective.
So one of the things people would say, and to us as researchers, it was interesting. I forget the exact phrase, but they were saying "jersu," like the jersu isn't the same. And I'm curious, if I was doing more research, I would be saying, is this even true in the Altai region? I always found the Altai Mountains so fascinating because it's Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Russia, China. It's one mountain range. Kazakhs are everywhere, and yet the economics and politics changed how Kazakhs lived. And so I think that's part of what happened is people said, surely it's not that hard to cross the mountains and come into the steppe, but it's very, very different. And the privileged exclusion idea was that here the government's giving all these payments, which could make native Kazakhstanis very jealous. They're getting a house, they're getting some help with a job, but they still are feeling this isn't my place. It's really hard for me to settle here. So that's why we were talking about they're so privileged, but also they, whether it's deliberate or not, they feel excluded.
What do you think was the main reason that they didn't feel welcome, or not welcome, just they didn't feel that it's not their country anymore?
I think a lot of, in parts of Xinjiang and parts of Bayanolgi, they really had preserved the culture of being nomadic pastoralists, and that's wonderful, but you come to Kazakhstan, and because of the forced settlement, that's almost gone. You didn't have the seasonal, really go into the mountains, come down with your herds, live on that. I think it's somewhat rare in Kazakhstan at this point. And so there was that difference, and then the language difference because of the colonization by Russians. So many people are still trying to regain their Kazakh language in Kazakhstan, and that was a barrier. People in Mongolia, they would maybe learn Mongolian in schools in Kazakh, but they did not learn Russian.
But they didn't lose their culture somehow.
They kept the culture.
So in Mongolia, they kept the culture, but in Kazakhstan, we didn't.
I mean, I think culture is flexible, so that was to me, you know, you were in Astana. That's one of the things with Astana. People will say, well, it's not Kazakh, and I would say, but it is Kazakh. It's a modern, contemporary, urban Kazakh, and I'm not Kazakh, so I can't speak to the question of what's truly Kazakh, but to me there was this, but the city and the country, all of the ways we navigate, just like in the US, Palo Alto here, and the countryside in Ohio where I grew up, they're both American, but it's a very different way of living.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you that question actually. Who is truly Kazakh?
I can't answer that question.
You are too diplomatic. I think you have your opinion, but...
I mean, so this is one of the interesting things being in an anthropology museum with ethnography, with archaeology. I think it's really fascinating. There's a move towards experimental archaeology, which is where you would say, we found these leather trousers from the Silk Road in southern Kazakhstan from 1,000 years ago or something. And how do we make them now, and can it help us regain culture from 1,000 years ago? And it's from what's under the earth, and they're saying, maybe we can bring this back. And similarly with ethnography, they're saying somebody collected Tuskias, and we don't sew that now, but there's this huge craft movement. And so I think in many cultures, people are really trying to bring back what they might once have kind of had pressure to or have discarded.
We were talking about like differences between Mongolian Kazakhs and Kazakhstan Kazakhs, right? Is there anything preserved that connect them?
I mean, I think there's huge language connection, cultural connection, right? And there's people who went back and forth, and I've heard this more from people, you know, and you guys would know as much as I do, but I've heard it more in terms of Kazakhstan and people I met who say, you know, my grandparents fled to China, and then they came back, and so there is this circulation, there's the intermarriage. You know, I don't think it's a totally separate culture.
Yeah, it's not totally separate, but we had a guest in our podcast like 3 months ago. His name is Manat Maulinbay. He is a Chinese Kazakh, educated in Switzerland, living in the United States for more than 30 years. And he came, and it was like one of our best, it was our best watched episode, and we had a huge feedback that everyone liked him because he was so just true Kazakh, you know. He doesn't speak Russian. He speaks only great Chinese, maybe some German, I don't know, and of course English and great Kazakh language. And when we were talking to him, I felt like I was talking to my uncle from my owl, right? Because you know, Kazakhs have this this personality, warmness, I don't know if I can describe it, but whenever we see that someone from Kazakhstan, oh my gosh, it's my brother or sister, right? It's just, I don't know why. And I felt like, even though his life trajectory was very different from mine, he's never been in, like, living in Kazakhstan, I felt like he is my relative. So that connection, of course, is there, but he was sharing some of his frustration when we went to Kazakhstan first time. Everyone was speaking Russian, and he felt so disappointed.
I think it's hard, and I was very privileged, right, to be at the National Anthropological Archives in the National Museum of Natural History in the Smithsonian.
Yeah.
And one of the big things they do is they try to work with language revitalization, especially with Native North Americans. So we were working with people who said, you know, because of colonization, genocide, we lost our so much of our language and culture. Maybe we have grandfathers who still speak it, maybe we don't. We want to reclaim it from these notes of these ethnographers, and they were doing it and really trying to take a dead language and make it alive again and make it modern. So I think the other interesting thing to me with that, part of why I love learning Kazakh or Russian or French, is it changes my thinking. And that can be good or bad. When you're trying to preserve a culture, you go, well, now I'm multicultural, I'm not pure in this one culture, but now I also have different ways of thinking. So if I'm a researcher or I'm writing poetry or I'm an entrepreneur, now I have this flexibility. And I think the challenge is, how do you maintain Kazakhhness and also have this flexibility?
How did that change, like knowing multiple languages, especially Kazakh? How did that influence your thinking? Can you give some examples?
I mean, I think for me, I came, aside from that brief experience when I was 16, I was in my 20s when I lived in Astana. And it was for me a formative time. I would find that some of my thinking, like I was young, so I could learn the language, I could learn the accent, and then I could also learn to think in that way. And like hospitality became very important to me. It's not a big thing in the U.S., but I would sit there, you know, saying, I have to put out nuts and almonds and apricots, and people in the U.S. would laugh at me and be like, why are you doing this? Like, you don't have to put out a dastarkhan. And I was like, but I do. And just,
that's so cute.
I know. I'm there. And there were times when I was in the Museum of Natural History and we would host guests, and I had an old Russian colleague, and he would just laugh at me because I'm running around like, we need the chai, we need all these things, and you really don't, but you do for guests. So that kind of thing. And you know, I never feel like I got fully bicultural. So much of my time was spent in Western institutions like Nazarbayev University or Haileybury, and they have a different mission. Yes. But just that opportunity it did shape how I think.
So you spent like several years in Astana, right? Mm-hmm. So can you please tell me about expat side of Astana? Because I was living in like a native citizen of Kazakhstan, right? We were like in different circles. I had my friends in Nazarbayev University, but as you said, it's very different culture. So were you like exposed to locals, like weddings, I don't know, toys, anything, you know?
I mean, as you know, Astana is very, very different from other parts of Kazakhstan. So I would say there were times where I went with friends or roommates down to Almaty or Shymkent, and it was a lot easier to sort of experience the toys and all of that there. You know, Nowruz was a party in Shymkent in a way it's more kind of governmentized in Astana. I really liked being in Astana and being able to, what was I going to say? I always had local housemates, so I worked really hard to live with people. Now, some of them didn't speak Kazakh. They spoke Russian, they spoke Tatar, but it still was an opportunity to be with, you know, young women my own age, and I really feel like some of my enculturation with gender also kind of came through this process of being with younger peers.
Your article was published like a few years ago, right? And as time has passed, Kazakhstan has seen changes in language policy and ongoing debates about our national identity. People say that we are closer to our national identities than we were like 10 years ago. I don't know, maybe you can tell us more. Do you think this phenomenon you described, like exclusion of our oralmans or khandas, is still a thing in Kazakhstan, or it's better, or you don't know?
So I haven't had a research project in the past 10 years that's of that sort, so I'd be really cautious.
Just your opinion.
But even from outside seeing, my impression is there's much more there was always valuing of Kazakh language, but it's occurring at all levels in a way maybe that it wasn't 10 or 20 years ago.
So you feel like our Khandas and other Kazakhs are feeling a little bit better than...
I hope so. I hope so. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So also, I wanted to touch a little about your experience in international school, a library, and Nazarbayev University, of course. I also found one of your articles on LinkedIn that you done some story or article or paper, I don't remember. You said you described 4-year-old Bolat, whose Russian-speaking parents would struggle with reading him English books. And so Bolat is Kazakh boy, apparently going to this international school, and his parents are Russian-speaking. And I know that Haileybury is a very wealthy, so only wealthy people can can go to the send their kids to that school. So I think, do you think there is did you feel or did you saw this connection between wealth, economic possibilities, and language in Kazakhstan? Because why Bolat's parents didn't speak Kazakh? I mean, did you see any Kazakh-speaking parents at Haileybury?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
They do exist. So I think I was always impressed. Elite children in Kazakhstan and elite children in the US often do many languages very young, which is a challenge. I think I heard that Barack Obama's daughters took Chinese very young, and of course the Obamas don't speak Chinese. So it's a way of giving opportunities. And I forget who the scholar was, but there's a US scholar who talks about sort of the way in which privilege amplifies privilege. So people start with an advantage and then they keep trying to make sure that their kids can maintain that. And that's true of elites around the world. And so, yeah, I think part of it goes back to the colonization, right? Of like the cities really got a lot of Kazakh stripped from them at some point. And so for these parents to succeed economically, their families, their grandparents lost, the Kazakh, they're left with Russian. And now they are trying to get their kids to speak Kazakh, but it's a second language. And so that's a challenge. And I would add with that, my own family came here from the US or from Europe, and we totally lost Irish. We lost German. We lost French. And I will never be fluent in those things. And so for many people moving borders or the culture changing, it's so easy to lose a language. And then all this effort, as you're seeing, goes back into reclaiming it.
Yeah, so you mentioned that there existed Kazakh-speaking parents at
Haileybury. Yes, they do
exist.
They do exist.
Okay, that's good to hear, because I have no one whose kids are in Haileybury, so I was imagining that they're very Russian-speaking. And in that article you said that Kazakh was a state language, English is a global language, but Russian is a home language, and it little bit
some people
hurt me because it's not your fault. It's a status quo in Kazakhstan, but for people like me, we speak Kazakh at home too. So Kazakh is our home language too. So just
yes, thank you. And if I was writing that now, I probably would write it very differently. And I also would there's this effort to promote Kazakh, which is so important, and I really believe in it, but I would sometimes find myself used as sort of almost propaganda for the renationalization movement, which is very important. And people would say, look, this foreigner, she speaks Kazakh. And of course, I had all these resources. I was at INU. I had free classes. US, our government actually pays for people to study less common languages like Macedonian. Like nobody in the US uses it, but they pay so that we're educated in all these international languages. So I felt like I had so many advantages. And then they talk to somebody, who does manual labor and say, why don't you speak Kazakh? And I'm like, well, get all these governments to have this person speak. And it is such a challenge. I've heard Kazakh teachers for so many years saying, how do we get this more fully in our culture? And an outlier like me who learns to speak, it doesn't address the whole issue. So it's super challenging.
You are describing it from one perspective, and it's very true. I agree with you on all points, but some people, especially on social media, they say that it's a question of respect and attitude. So they say, again, you said, that's a good thing. I will be quoting you, that you felt like you were like a subject of propaganda in learning Kazakh, because they say, why Americans come and speak Kazakh, and why our other Kazakh compatriots, they don't speak Kazakh. And they also give examples of American ambassador who, every American ambassador comes to Astana and they say some kind of a speech on video, and they start with Саламатсыздар ма, қуаныштымын, and they say, why Russian ambassador never does that? So as an anthropologist, do you think there is like a kind of a truth element in that opinion?
Again, I'm cautious myself. As you know, I'm very cautious of making sort of these statements that would be political. I think as anthropologists, we look at speech, as you say, at speech as actions. So if I go to a country and I try to learn to say a few words in that language, it is a sign of respect. And of course, many Kazakhs, they'll go to Greece and they'll try to learn some Greek. So it is interesting to me as an anthropologist if someone would be in a formal role and they don't try to speak in multiple languages. But I can't comment, what I think of it, but just, yes, it's interesting. And we noticed, all of us, like you point out, all of us notice what's used, what's not used, and what we then interpret, what does that mean?
Many foreigners spend a short time in Central Asia and come back with some kind of stereotypes. Recently I discovered an article that Kazakh cuisine was named one of the worst in the world.
Oh no!
Yes, by some tourists, because I understand it's very greasy and fat, but maybe it's very hard to digest and everything. I mean, what surprised you most when you mentioned that you were when you were 16, so you were familiar, but still, did you have some kind of a thought about Central Asia? You didn't know anything probably, right, before coming? Or?
Not before the first time.
So there was no stereotype changes.
I mean, I think that your perspective, like you said, deepens the more time you spend in a place, and different angles, so different places. It's very easy, going back to your expat question, for expats to come and live quite a while and still not be able to fully integrate, whether it's a language barrier or physical barrier, right? You're kind of surrounded by other expats, and that's only who you socialize with. And then I don't know that the stereotypes would change that much in that short amount of time. I also think stereotypes are socially reinforced. So if I was hanging out with expats or locals who are quite judgmental of the culture, I would probably pick that up. Even if I saw concrete evidence that might disprove it, we tend to believe what we and our friends already believe. So there is that kind of communicating of the value of something. And to get to your question about food, it's really difficult because there are such stereotypes about what's good food and bad food. And many sociologists fight this in the US because, again, the elites will eat certain foods. They'll eat vegan, they'll eat vegetables, they'll eat farm-raised, and that's very expensive for other people. And so now you're making a judgment about food and you're implicitly judging working class people. And that's difficult. And I did encounter that when I was living with Kazakhs where, like you said, my cultural background said, oh, fat is dangerous. And they would look at the same cuisine and say, oh, this other thing is dangerous. So you're kind of having that culture interaction that can at times reinforce stereotypes.
Yeah.
But I do like Kazakh food. I miss it. I look in where's the Central Asia food in any city that I'm in.
Yeah, unfortunately, you can't have horse meat here in the United States.
I know.
Right? I understand horse lovers. I do. Please, sorry, we apologize. But we can't stop loving horse meat.
I know, I enjoy it as well.
Yeah, okay. Of course, we had to talk about this Kazakhs, right? Kazakh things in our podcast, but you are also a very interesting person as a professional for me. Just wanted to ask a couple of questions about your work as an archivist and historian, I would say that, librarian. In your research, what do you think, what stories still need to be told globally about Central Asia or Kazakhstan, like in research, from research science side?
I think something that's interesting...
Maybe underrepresented, right?
Yes, very underrepresented. I think something that's interesting is to map where the colonial contexts have been. So obviously Russia colonized Central Asia, so I think in the Russian language, literature, the archives, there's going to be a lot more about Central Asia. And one of the things that's disappointing for me, often when I go to an archive or a museum in the US, is there's nothing, right? There's nothing from Kazakhstan. And I say, you're a huge global, institution, and I wish that you had something from Central Asia. The other thing I would say is I did a project at one point looking at book awards. So a scholar writes a book and the best book will get an award. And I looked at all the book awards in anthropology over 50 years, and there was nothing from Central Asia. It was just a complete gap on the map that I made. There was no award-winning book about Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan, at least the post-Soviet states.
What is the reason, do you think? Why? Like, to both of your points.
On that sort of more concrete question of
Like,
what literature is getting cited, what books are getting awards, I think part of it's that scholars of Central Asia and your readers and your listeners, the people who've been on this podcast, can inform this more than I can, but often we're publishing in area studies journals. So we're in Central Asian studies, and the anthropologists and the geographers are not always reading that. And so when you're speaking to your community of like-minded scholars, it's hard to get out and really have somebody say, wow, this was the greatest theory, and now I'm going to apply it to Mexico, which is part of how you get in the global discourse. So there's so many great films too, right? There's great things that Kazakh creators are doing, and it's maybe in a little ethnographic film festival, but it's not quite hitting it big. So there is that question of how you get it out there, Central Asia.
Celia, so we are sitting here in Silk Road Innovation Hub building.
Yes.
I told about it's a center where people from Central Eurasia, Central Asia, founders, they come here and just find resources, get contacts to investors and everything. And they have this motto, Silk Road Innovation Hub. They say, we represent the last untapped place in the world, right? Because they say, everyone knows like Indian entrepreneurs, European, of course, Russian, Ukrainian, Australian, some African, Latin American, of course, North America, but no one knows anything about Kazakhstan and the other countries around. So that's very interesting. Why? Because so we were like a post-Soviet, we have post-Soviet countries, right? But people know about Ukraine and Belarus more than about Central Asia. And even when we come here and we fill out lots of surveys, Americans love surveys.
Yeah, we do. It's terrible.
But it's good for anthropologists,
it is.
Right?
We learn a lot, but it never ends.
We have huge data.
Yes.
And everyone is asking what ethnicity you are, what race you are. And I check Asian, and after that they will say Vietnamese, Korean, Southeast, and everything. I don't have my ethnicity, so it's just we don't exist.
Yeah, and there's that sort of bureaucratic governmentality of, who exists on the forms and census, right? All of these things are really important to make sure that you're there. And then it's also the popular imagination. And I think one of the things that's been challenging is that Central Asia is so often used for Afghanistan, right? So in the American imagination, Afghanistan is huge, and you're saying, but we're a different community. And, I'm thinking out loud, maybe for the less formal branding, it's, oasis and steppe cultures or something. It's a way of saying we're different than Mongolia. We might be very similar. We're different than Tibet. You're thinking these things are Central Asia, but actually we have our own value, our history, our entrepreneurship as steppe and oasis cultures, and we want you to see us as a sort of untapped resource, but also something that exists. We don't want to get into the colonization narrative of this place is empty, there's all these resources we can extract, and I know that countries struggle with that.
Yeah. You mentioned that average American, they would perceive Kazakhstan as a part of culture of Afghanistan, Pakistan, other Stan countries, and scientific scholars, they perceive Kazakhstan as Soviet, Russian-speaking, East Eurasia, Eastern Europe studies. Eurasia, yeah. So that's really, really interesting. Maybe there was some discussions in Kazakhstan lately that maybe we have to change our name as this country, Kazakh Yele, something like that, because they say it's just, I don't know, it would be very interesting to observe. But
and that's where Silk Road, as you know, that's become a moniker that people realize Silk Road is maybe somewhere in between.
Yeah. Do American archives, they reflect these colonial, power structures in all of these documents? So, okay, yesterday I was preparing to our conversation, and I Googled Peabody Museum.
Yes.
It's fascinating. And I noticed that you have a mission, and you say, some legacies influence the museum's past practices of collecting, researching, and displaying collections from Western perspective, right? So I see that researchers now, they're starting to distance themselves from this past perspective of higher civilizations, researching some lower cultures, right? Tell me more about this. It's very interesting, not in relation to Kazakhstan, but just overall. Is this is this a real thing now that researchers, they don't use this lens when they research these countries?
So I think, and when you think of lens, colonization itself has become a major lens to look at archives with, and museums and libraries, and that's sort of a new discourse that says, you know, what have we done in the past and what traces does it leave in both the structures, right? So you go to a library catalog and it's organized by Universal Decimal Classification, Dewey Decimal, Library of Congress. These are all systems mostly developed in the US. And so now the US is determining how knowledge is structured. And so there have been really interesting movements in places like Indigenous communities in Canada, with Maori communities in Aotearoa in New Zealand. And they're saying, actually, we want to reorganize the structure of a library entirely. We have our own order of the books on the shelf. We have our own subject headings that would help you find the topic, like gender. We're using our word, which may not be the same as Western gender, because we're reclaiming our own knowledge system. And that's really important. It's a little hard to integrate the two systems, but it's really important work. And obviously, I have to say, I don't represent any institution at all, but I do see all of these institutions working really hard at this. And there's a lot of critique that's very, you know, justified historically. And yet when I talk to an individual librarian, archivist, curator on the ground, most of them are doing everything they can to say, I cannot fix 400 years of history today, but I'm working towards it.
So things are shifting.
Definitely shifting.
Yeah. Great, great. Especially what is interesting for me, like you mentioned several times indigenous cultures, and someone is trying to revive their language and culture and everything. I know that you are not researching them, but probably you know more than I do. I mean, one of the last episodes was a historian, Jan Campbell, and he is a historian researching Russian colonization of Kazakhstan. And he compared two things, like American colonization of indigenous people and the Russian colonization in Kazakhstan, and he said American was much worse because language are not kept, not preserved, and I mean, I was surprised because I was thinking, okay, like Russians did so much bad things in Kazakhstan, but he says no, actually Americans did worse things in here. So can you please tell me about like some narratives happening in scientific circles and maybe some average Native American cultures here? What's going on?
It's a big topic.
I know.
I think one of the things we're wrestling with is that all of this is still in living memory. So one of the things I think about is Genghis Khan, right? And he swept the world, so much of it, and he did terrible things, but also was a very powerful empire. And that, at this point in time, that memory is lost, that specificity of this happened in this place. You really have to dig in, sometimes archivally, but usually archaeologically, to try to get to what happened in Otorara or something. That might have been a different. But I think here it's still in the memories of people that their parents or maybe even themselves were taken to a boarding school and re-educated, right? So they deliberately took away the language, the clothing, the culture. And now we're trying to, 60 years later, to reclaim it, and it's really, really challenging. And there's a strong voice in the US of indigenous people who are saying, wait a minute, this is what happened to us, and we're telling our story, and we're narrating this history to make clear that it's not a one-sided history. And so, to me, indigenous voices around the world are some of the strongest voices to challenge a kind of unilinear historical narrative. And organizations like the UN have declarations on indigenous rights. They're really trying to make that visible as well. But it's often more complicated places like Kazakhstan because, you know, is there an indigenous group in the same way? What does that mean when cultures mix? It's in most of the world, it's really hard to answer kind of that question.
Right. If we compare again Kazakhstan and cultures here, I've never been in Native American reservation in America, but I feel like I had a classmate from Berkeley. She is a representative of indigenous people, and I feel like they have very distinct culture and other Americans are not very connected with it, right? It's like it's protected somehow. I don't know, it was my feeling. In Kazakhstan, it's mixed. You don't know who is Kazakh and who is Russian anymore.
Yeah. And I think Kazakhstan has been very proud, in my understanding, for a while of look at all these nationalities. You know, there might have been Russian things that led to deportations and such, the gulags that led to this diversity, but there is a tremendous diversity. So how you are Kazakh or Kazakhstani and multi-cultural at the same time is a really difficult question. But like you say, there's mixing. I think one of the narratives you've probably heard in the US is one about appropriation. So people are saying, I don't want somebody who is actually a white person to act like they're Cherokee. And that creates this real challenge of like, how would you have...
Why not?
I know. So this is, again, the culture. And as an anthropologist, I would say, I'm observing a cultural movement, which is to say white people should not try to be indigenous. And what that means is hopefully indigenous communities can preserve and revitalize a culture, but it isn't going to spread nationwide if there's those concerns about cultural appropriation. It's also harder because in our nation, I think there's 574 recognized tribes. So it's not just like, let's make the nation Kazakh.
Yeah.
There's so much
so many
going
different
on.
Cultures.
There are movements to rename places in the country, to bring in, culture, to make it more visible, certainly. And there's a very strong narrative that says people tried to get rid of us, but we haven't gone away. We're still here. And even if I'm not wearing a traditional costume, I'm still indigenous.
Bad Bunny's last, he said Canada, and after that, my motherland, Puerto Rico, and we are still here, right?
That's that narrative.
God bless America, sea Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Bolivia, Perú, Ecuador, Brasil, Colombia, Venezuela, Guyana, Panamá, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, México, Cuba, República Dominicana, Jamaica, Haití, las Antillas, United States, Canadá, and my motherland, mi patria, Puerto Rico. Seguimos aquí. Ahora sí.
The other thing that people talk about, is this kind of nothing about us without us. So this caution, and it's a challenge in scholarship or in creative writing, of we want an imagination that is wide, where we really don't just speak about ourselves, and yet, is a Russian allowed to write a book that's really about Kazakh culture, right? This is a challenge everywhere.
In Kazakhstan, yesterday Kazakhstan had a huge happy event.
Yes.
Like Mikhail Chaidorov, figure skater, won Olympic medal, yay!
Yeah.
And I saw some Instagram account of a girl. She had a Slavic appearance. She's from Kazakhstan, student in Milan, and she wore this beautiful, gorgeous Kazakh traditional costume and the jewelry. And she went and was жанкүйер болды, I don't know, болела за Mikhaila. And Mikhail is not Kazakh ethnicity, right? And she is obviously not Kazakh, but she was so proud to be wearing this Kazakh clothing, and everyone was rooting for her. Молодец, красивая, күшті қыз екенсің, и так далее. And in Kazakhstan, we will be happily, gladly, please appropriate cultural, please wear, please be Kazakh as much as you can, right? I mean, it's very
And maybe the difference, I'm thinking aloud again, is that in Kazakhstan you have Kazakhs in leadership. And in the US,
that is why.
If I don't want to be, but if I was the president of the country, I'm really not representing all of my co-citizens, all of these citizens also of independent nations who are saying, I want to be represented. I want my people also to be in leadership. And so there is, I understand where that kind of concern about appropriation comes from.
Yeah.
And part of, what I would encourage you too is to find some of these overlaps and say, maybe in these podcasts you can invite in, indigenous people to reflect on what's the similarity with Kazakh.
I would love to.
And I think you want to be careful about conflating different places, but there may be people who live in something similar to a yurt, or they have a horse riding culture, and it would be really interesting to have that cross-cultural discussion.
They are very similar. In fact, some Kazakh people, they believe that they're our distant relatives.
I mean, if all of us are related in the world somewhere.
I mean, that they were living in structures like yurta, right? Or horse riding, or even appearances somehow. related to this.
And one of the things I really care about too when it comes to language and culture is so often it's mediated through someone like me, right? I could go live with Diné people, with Navajo, and then I could go live in Mongolia and say, look, similarities. But I would love to see more resources and support. So, Kazakh citizens, Kazakh herders from Mongolia could come and meet people living traditional lifestyles in the U.S. directly. And language could be, the richness could be shared directly rather than having to go through Russia or the U.S. like white people.
Yeah. But personally, if a Russian historian writes a good book about Kazakhs, I would be happy. Just do it. You have all my support. Right? So, I know it's like a maятник. When something is pressured to one side, after a little bit, it will be pressured to another side. So after 70 years of Soviet, maybe more, like with Russian imperialism and the Soviet period, Kazakhs now pushing back, and we also have lots of mistakes, like some of discussions on social media. I don't support that at all. As you said, we are all relatives, and it doesn't matter what skin color you are. If under the skin, we are all the same color, right? Like blood.
I will say that's one of the challenges with skin color too, is on the one hand, we know there's discrimination based on skin color in all different continents, all different countries. And so the color is important, and people being proud of their skin, no matter what it is really important. It's also a challenge when, you start to include and exclude based on skin color, which happens within communities and across communities. I found it very interesting when I was in Kazakhstan. Like I said, I speak Kazakh better than Russian, so I would try to talk in Kazakh. And I had people who looked at me and kept responding in Russian. And they said, I know you know Kazakh, I know it too, but my brain says I need to talk in Russian to you.
It's a psychological barrier. It's like, that's very interesting. I grew up in a very rural area. We had no one Russian speaking at all, so I grew up very Kazakh speaking, thanks to my parents. Now I speak Russian too and a little bit English now. But when I moved to Astana to study, to be an archaeologist.
Yes.
I love it. I love history. And I somehow had two circles of friends. With one circle, I would speak Kazakh, and with one circle, I would speak Russian because they didn't speak Kazakh. And when they later asked me, Aksaule, please speak Kazakh with us, we want to improve our language, I couldn't.
You were so used to the code switching.
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
With those people, so when Kazakhs see you like a very white and red hair person with beautiful, and they couldn't just switch in their brains probably. That's very interesting. It's something psychological. Бірақ сіздің қазақша, негізі қазақша сөйлеуіміз керек еді. Комментаторлар жазады ертең, қазақша күшті біледі мына Селия қарындасым, неге сөйлемейсіңдер қазақша? In Kazakhstan, many families carry this memory of like famine, repressions, war even, right? And like colonization, language, тіл жойылып кетті, and it's mostly in our memory, not written in papers, I think, right? It's like just our, like trauma survives primarily through oral memory, and it's not reflected in official archives. Do you think if things were different, it would be better for us as a nation to recover? Or, I mean...
Trauma and memory is such a hard thing, right? And it's hard in that you want to recover it, you want to tell that story, but you also don't want to live in it forever and have that be your narrative forever. And I've certainly experienced that. If I can tell the same story over and over, and is it helping me? It is nice to have it, important, I think, to either have it or both transmitted orally and in writing.
Right.
There is such a bias in our world right now towards writing and a tendency to write everything down. And certainly as an anthropologist, especially a Western anthropologist, it's my tendency as well to say, does it really exist if it's not written?
Yes.
And even with my own elders and ancestors, for me it's, oh, grandma says it, I should write it down, but do I have to, or could I simply pass it along orally? Is it impermanent because it's not written? To me as a librarian and anthropologist, there's this larger question of, is everything written going to be saved forever? Certainly with the internet, we do so much of sharing our stories and holding what is ours to hold on the internet, but what happens if it goes away, God forbid? and we haven't developed that skill of keeping things in memory. So that's where I think like өлеңдер and these other types of these other types of memories, and the way I was reading recently in English culture about things like Beowulf, right? Old English epics or stories, and they're written in such a song-like way that you can remember them, or poetry that kind of sticks in your brain. And
it's not related to our conversation here, but I just remembered, I don't know if it's true or not, they say it's why so many epos, jir, and other songs, they're written in like a poetic form, because you can't change poetic form. If I'm retelling a story, I could omit some things, like skip some things, change them, replace some facts, and you will do the same, like towards the next person, and it will change eventually. But it's like Manas epos in Kyrgyzstan or Qizbek in our culture. If it's written in this form, you will just rememorize it, and it's like and you deliver to the next person in the same way.
And again, like there's a writing bias, so it could be written, it could be oral, and I think, right, Central Asian cultures have such a strong tradition of oral things being passed down, which is hard, because when you look at 400 years ago, you say, well, there's nothing written. It's like, well, there is that cultural memory, so how do we pass that on? And I do think, like I said, the structure of these narrative, poetic, sort of lyric epos would make it easier to pass it down. And you know, if I was really working under an elder, I'm sure he or she would be telling me, wait, you said that wrong, do it again, do it again, do it again.
Yeah, you're right. Again, when I was a student, I liked reading books of Lev Gumilev. I don't know if he is considered like a legit scientist in scientific circles, but he had this theory that why do you think that nomadic culture was somehow lower than urban culture? Because they had the same complex things, but it just didn't survive through the centuries. It's like if you have like 5,000 years of archives in China, it's of course China is a very ancient and a complex and great civilization, but maybe nomadic culture also had this kind of stuff, but it just didn't go through the...
And I suspect that's why some people go back to Tingrism, where they look at the Altyn Adam and they say, whether or not it's my, you know, DNA ancestor, I need this tradition to draw on to say, actually, we've always been here. Somebody has always been here.
Somebody has always been here, yeah. I don't know why we always strive to find some connections with the past, right? Yeah. And also Kazakhs and other Central Asian people, they changed their alphabet several times during the 20th century. It didn't help at all to the cause, right? And maybe we Kazakhstan also changed to Latin. I don't know. Lately, no one is talking about it. But when you're living in Astana, probably it was a huge discussion that we could...
It was Cyrillic, and it was just starting to be Latin. And like you said, everyone keeps adjusting the Latin script, trying to find something that's readable and understandable. And again, I see that as both a political and a cultural move to say, are we aligned with, you know, China, Russia, you know, Saudi Arabia, West? All of those are signified by that script. I find it fascinating that Kazakhs in Xinjiang are using the Arabic
we can't
script,
text
right?
each other.
Right.
Because, again, I mentioned Manat Maulimbai. So when I found his phone number, I tried to text him. I wouldn't call like a senior, right? Just out of nowhere. And I started texting in Cyrillic, in Kazakh, but I realized, what if he doesn't know how to read in Cyrillic? So I had to send messages in English. He was answering me in English, and we all only spoke Kazakh when he came orally. And that was a real revelation for me, because we have more than 1 million Kazakhs in China, more than lots of Kazakhs in Mongolia, and this connection is lost because they use another. I don't understand Arabic script. They don't understand Cyrillic. That's really sad. Yeah. I'm talking a lot.
No, you're good. You're good.
I have to use this time to hear from you. We are sitting here in the Bay Area, IT tech way of life. So I had to ask this question. is this AI or tech development somehow influencing your work? How archives or how libraries work? Like, what kind of major shifts are happening around this? Like, maybe we don't know. Maybe I don't know. I think it's very fascinating for you, right?
So I think I always think of them together because I've worked in all three: libraries, archives, and museums. People will call it LAM, or we add galleries and we call it GLAM, which makes us sound very fancy.
Wow.
I like to say I'm very glam.
Yes.
But all of them have different systems, they have different ways of cataloging, and yet there's a movement to say, what could we do together? So there's a group called AI for LAM right now that's really trying to address, is this useful, is it not? It's not always good at research, it's good at generating ideas. I did test in chat, GPT was talking to me in Kazakh, which was nice. I was like, tell me words about museums in Kazakh, and I could check it, right, because I know the language. But how do I integrate that into my work? Sometimes it's a little less clear. I don't think AI is there yet where I would say I can really meaningfully change how I am doing my work or writing policies. It's not there yet.
Okay. But everything is digitized right now, right?
No.
No?
No, never.
Oh.
I don't think it ever will be. I think
Why?
our National Archives has 2% of their records digitized.
It's so
big. It's so big. The Americans love papers. Like you said, paperwork, surveys. It's so much that I don't think it ever will be. And the same is true in archives. In the National Anthropological Archives where I was working, we like to say that if you put all of our boxes end on end, it would be 17 Washington monuments tall.
Wow.
And I can't sit there at a scanner and scan 17 Washington monuments. So we're always making decisions about which thing we describe first and which thing we digitize first, and then how do you keep it online in a lasting way. And that absorbs, I think, a lot of people's time. So if new technologies could help with that and be reliable, we would be very interested. I think there's a lot of tech opportunities for GLAM institutions. The challenge is we don't always have a lot of money. So are you going to get big? I don't know. So
yeah, lately especially, right, with these fundings to universities, and did it affect your work somehow? Like Harvard was like in the front of the fight?
So there's a lot of different institutions and government agencies in the front of the fight. And again, I can't comment directly on that, but I can say I've seen that for a long while, right? Like you get the gradual budget reduction. Some public universities that used to be almost entirely funded by taxpayers are now only 10% funded by taxpayers. So you think, oh, this is a state university. Well, it's almost entirely privately funded, and that changes your research. It changes your teaching. So I think for all of these institutions, the great challenge is going to be, you know, maybe money came in 1960 or 70 that helped us grow big. What's the next 50 or 100 years going to look like? How do you have the best library of Alexandria if bluntly rich people aren't really putting in sizable endowments? And I think whether it's Kazakhstan or the US, I would hope that people would invest for 100 years.
Yeah, that's great. Also, wanted to ask this question. I noticed that one of the most surprising things for me when I came to America, if you ask me, was that Americans are very reading nation. Libraries are just huge and for kids, and if you ask me what is your favorite spot in the Bay Area, I would answer it's Saratoga Library. I mean, I love it. I love being there. It's just atmosphere, and the building is so great, and so many books. I love that Americans read a lot. In Kazakhstan, we don't read a lot, actually. That's a bad thing. So how Americans did this thing? Why are you such a reading nation? Like, was it like a government
No.
Initiative, or
no, I would say
like
no.
From schools?
It goes back quite a while. So I think if you went back all the way, I have not read the whole thing, but if you went back to Alexis de Tocqueville, he was an early French traveler who came to the U.S. and observed and said, these Americans, they're weird, this is their culture, and he wrote letters home. Kind of an early ethnographer in some ways.
Is he from Europe?
He was French.
Okay,
so he came when the U.S. was just founding, and he's trying to understand Americans as a culture, and we've never been one culture, but he's trying to understand. And then you had these men who extracted, robber barons, they extracted so much money, and they gave it back in the form of like the Carnegie libraries. And so then there were all these libraries established in all these small towns. There was a huge writing culture and a reading culture. And I think even very working class people, you know, would have a communist newspaper or something where they're putting things in writing, right? It's not just oral. And so that's part of the culture. I think we benefit from the dominance of English worldwide. And so there's so much material. And that's really something I felt when I was a children's librarian in Kazakhstan, was there was so little that was about life today. Like, I'm in Astana, here's a fairy tale, like Harry Potter set in Astana today. And I really wanted, I didn't have the language skill, I wanted to write that in Kazakh and say, it's not just the Saltastura, it's not just ertegelere. Like, those are very important, but like...
Қазіргі заманның кітабы жоқ, иә, ертекті
кітабы жоқ, және екі тілдегі кітабы аз.
Орыс тілінде Ресейден келеді, бірақ бізде соңғы кезде жайлап кішкене бастап жатыр, бірақ әлі жеткіліксіз.
And if I look online, and I would look for Kazakh language material because I wanted to learn by reading, and it was translated like Rumpelstiltskin, American fairy tales, and I thought, that's not what I want. So that is all developing, and again, I am always attuned coming out of libraries, like things take money, so somebody needs to give substantial money, and I would love to see that investment. I think Europe maybe does it better even than America, to say we are investing in writers and creators and editors and small printing presses. I'm always cautious about just working with these multinational conglomerates, because then it's taken out of local hands.
Can you say that your identity somehow changed after being in Kazakhstan or not? You've touched it a little bit, but can you please explore it more? I mean, in other areas of life, probably.
I became aware of cultural differences by living in Kazakhstan. And when I first visited, it was very easy for me as a young American to be very critical of my country and say, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. I'm not really American. I'm not proud of my country. And I loved Kazakhstan, so there was nothing for me negative about Kazakhstan. But when I was there, I was like, oh, I'm an American. This is my culture. This is my people.
Wow.
I should be able to be proud of that the same way a Kazakh is proud of being Kazakhstani.
Wow. And you learned that from Kazakhstan?
I learned that by going, that's why I love travel, and I love, I love to learn from other people and support them, but also I get so much. I certainly also became aware of privilege. So I wrote one article on librarians and sort of career decisions and gender, and the way that, particularly for women as librarians, it affects us. And one of the things I articulated was passport privilege, because my career as a librarian started in Kazakhstan. I started at local wages. I was right next to my colleagues, and all of us were learning. And then because I was American, because my country pays people more, I could go back to America and my career could just go step up. And my colleagues, I think they might have been smarter and more talented than me, but it was harder for them to move. And so to me, that became a concern of, again, how do we, without thinking anyone's more or less developed, that's a sort of terrible way of thinking, how do we work effectively as colleagues when all of these structures, including national borders, are making it hard? And I became much more aware of that. And aware, I would say, too, of the impacts of the idealism of America. One thing I observed in 2018 when I went to Kazakhstan was, in my own country and my own institutions, there was a huge push for open access. And we were saying, let's open up all of the journals, all of the articles, all of the databases. Everything should be open to the whole world. The challenge was the publishers still needed money to operate. So they would come to Kazakhstan and they would sell very expensive databases to Kazakhstan, charge so much money to the government while they were working with us to make things free. Wow. And I was saying, wait a minute, this is not progress if now the costs are put on another country.
What about this open access? Like, how are things now with this open?
I mean, I think people are still working on that. That gets back to your idea about digitization is, if something's online, people anywhere in the world can access it. Ideally, if it's free, it's really amazing.
Yeah.
But how is that funded? Which governments or universities are paying for it? And where do you run into cultural issues too? So again, you're back to some indigenous people say, wait a minute, I don't want somebody else taking a photo of my grandpa and putting it on a handbag, right? Like that's insulting. I also think I'm certainly aware that for some cultures, that knowledge has been taken away. So if you're Kazakh and you can't find your own documents or photos because they're in an archive in Russia or Frankfurt, like now you're stuck until it gets digitized, because most people can't go fly to Frankfurt or wherever. So,
yeah, that's a huge issue, right? not about Kazakh or Central Asian culture, but cultures everywhere. Есіңізде қалған ең сондай момент болды ма? Назарбаев университеті Haileybury Астанада тұрғанда. What was this like most memorable moment of your life over there?
I mean, this is not a major moment. One of my favorite experiences is probably just going over to one of my Kazakh teachers' house for New Year's, Жаңа жыл, seeing the children enjoying snegurочка and eating, you know, all of this traditional food and just feeling a part of a family and a community. So I think people never want to feel like you're performing your culture for somebody. That's a burden.
Yes,
but
yes.
when you have the chance to be invited in, it's an honor.
What about setbacks?
In Kazakhstan or in general?
In Kazakhstan.
I think one of the good things about when I lived in Kazakhstan was that it was at the start of my career. And so I think at times there were librarians who would come from Great Britain or the US, and they would be very frustrated. They would say, this is different, maybe I'm judging the system. And I was so young and naive, I was like, this is all great. And occasionally there would be experiences I look back on and I say, well, that was bizarre, but I was so appreciative. So I always tell people, like, go abroad when you're young if you can, because you'll have all of this openness and you won't have that idea yet of I have to do it this way.
You're not very rigid, right?
I was not rigid, no.
Yes, yeah. Okay. And finally, if you could preserve one intangible aspect of human culture as an anthropologist, something invisible but deeply meaningful, what would it be and why? Like you have this power of preserving something.
Humor. I love humor. I love words. And so when people do this wordplay, they're having fun, they're telling jokes, right? It's beautiful. And you can try to write it down, and when you lose the context, you lose so much. And so there's all sorts of hard things about human nature. There's war, there's power, there's aggression. And yet when you're able to laugh together, it just can be really beautiful.
Kazakh language is, sometimes can be very witty. And people who don't know Kazakh, they will not understand. But if you understand, it might be very, very funny too.
And there's always mixing, right? Which I love. In so many cultures, there's the overlap. I'm living in Astana, and you could joke around with friends, and you could tell a joke that was English, Russian, Kazakh at the same time. And you feel a tremendous sense of place of like, I'm an Astana person, because how many people understand this, right? Yes. And so the mixing too is part of culture.
Is Astana your most favorite city in Kazakhstan?
It's so cold.
Right?
I mean,
so be honest, please.
I really enjoyed my time there. I think Almaty, maybe it's a little easier to live. Shymkent feels more Kazakh. I wanted to get to other places like Mangostau or something, and I never did.
I'm from Western Kazakhstan.
See, someday I need to go. I've never been to Western Kazakhstan.
You should, because it's very different. I'm from Ural region, and Ural and Mangostau are very different, right? Because we are closer to Russia. Even our language and even our dialect is, for example, noodles. We never said kispe. Okay. I grew up in very Kazakh household, but we say lapsha. Or other, I mean, this kind of stuff, it influences us.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Can you please recommend some books or maybe podcasts in anthropology, in history, in research, maybe related to Central Asia, maybe not, just your favorites for our viewers who is interested also?
I would really have to think about it. I don't think I have an easy answer.
Okay. Maybe authors we have to follow or something.
I would have to think about it. I want to see more everywhere about Central Asia, more integrated into all sorts of discussions. I love it when it's focused on Central Asia. I definitely also want to see it represented. Anytime there's a broad discussion of human nature or culture, that there's, you know, an episode, you really introduce people to something.
Maybe some names of anthropologists or, I mean, everyone like who are writing some really interesting books. Do you know them?
I mean, I have a bias towards my professor,
yeah, please,
Cynthia Werner, and I think her work is great. And some of this, my knowledge is a few years old with some of this. I also think I would like to see more writing, more narrative writing like Kristen Godsey did, and she worked primarily, I think, in Bulgaria, so different, post-socialist, but very, very different. And yet she wrote such readable books. It was an enjoyable thing to read, and often scholars were really good at argument, and reading is a challenge. So I'd love to see, like, readability is a challenge. I judged the Victor Turner Prize in ethnographic writing, which is a pretty good way to find readable books that are written by anthropologists. And I wish I went to see a Kazakh book win that. It hasn't happened yet. But I would love to see more support for that. And even, maybe even in Kazakhstan, when people are structuring PhD programs, to say we're really going to support people in telling stories such a way that we could translate and really hit an international market, that might be a way to kind of get the word out again and make Kazakh culture something that really can spread.
When you're answering, I also one question, I was planning to finish our conversation, but one question came to mind. Maybe some people will hate me for that, but we are trying to find our identity as Kazakhs in Kazakhstan. It's really hard. The reason why we started this podcast in Kazakh, it's only in Kazakh or in English with Kazakh subtitles, but we had some producers, like very well known, they said, with Kazakh you are not going anywhere, like no one will watch this, do it in Russian, but we still, Kazakhs, but we still are, we believe in Kazakh language and we want to do more content in Kazakh language on YouTube and other podcast platforms. But when I was listening to you after today's conversation, I wanted to ask, so probably Russian people, right? Or other post-Soviet country people. Are we all the same? Is this like Soviet element is still preserved in our identity? And what if we not reject that? Right now Kazakhs want to reject Soviet history and Russian influence. What if we should welcome it and maybe we are all Russian partly, and we have to just accept that? What? Because Mongolia and Kazakhs came and they saw that Kazakhs changed. And I feel like we are fighting with our own parts.
I think that's common so often around the world, and it's such a struggle, and it can be such a long struggle. Like you said, it's been years that people have been saying, what is it to be Kazakh? How do we become more Kazakh? And, I can, again, I'm cautious speaking for other people, I can say for myself, having worked with different cultures, lived in different places, working in an ethnography archive, it brought the question forward to me of like, who am I? I'm an American. I come from European descent. We've lost we're part of a dominant Euro-American culture, but we've lost all the specific elements. I can make, a specific food, I can learn some German or French, it doesn't make me German or French. So it's a challenge whether you're in a minority group or a majority group in a country, or whether with Kazakhstan you're trying to form a whole national identity, or by Anolgi maybe it's a regional identity. I do think it's really interesting what you've said of, can we integrate? Can we be strong? Can we be really proud of ourselves, but actually integrate rather than just rejecting? And that's going to take time. I also think Kazakhs could be looking to other, these indigenous communities that are so powerful in the US, or other national movements in other countries, and say what worked for them, what just caused more division, what caused unrest. How do we do this? And I wish I had an easy answer, but I agree with you. Culture is always changing. Kazakh culture of today is not 100 years ago. My own culture is not 100 years ago. And I can try to weave and spin and raise cows like my great-grandmother. It's never going to be the same. So how I take her stories and move forward, all of us have this challenge. And back to jokes, back to storytelling, back to epics, we carry something with us. So maybe Russian does get integrated into the Kazakh epic and Kazakh story, but it still becomes essentially Kazakh. And I think that's very possible. That you would be, that Kazakhstanness, Kazakhstaniness would be sort of a light in the world, a light in the region, and something people are really, really proud of.
Thank you, Celia. I enjoyed our conversation so much. We wish you all the best. Не болса да алдыңыз жолыңыз ашық болсын, тек қана жақсы адамдар кездесsin. Келесі жолы келгенде сізді тағы да күтеміз.
Рахмет.
Рахмет.
Сау болыңыздар.
Селияға комментарий қалдырыңыздар. Ол оқиды, сирилікті біледі. Қазақша жазыңыздар. Көп рахмет. Алда тағы да талай қызықты қонақтар күтіп тұр. Келесі кездескенше.